everyone! Today we are going to be doing the tutorial for the cover and base pages for this Watercolor Floral mini album by Prima. So stay tuned! Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to start with the cover and base pages for the mini album. So I am going to start with two pieces of chipboard that are cut to 8.5 by 11 and three pieces of chipboard that are cut to 11 by 3.5. And what I'm doing here is laying out some 65-pound cardstock to cover the chipboard to make my cover. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any cardstock that is large enough to do this without layering, so I'm laying them out and then laying my chipboard pieces on top of it so that I can make sure that they're going to fit with enough overlap to wrap the cover before I go ahead and glue everything together. So it looks like it's going to work. So now I just have to connect all of the pieces of cardstock together. So to do this, I usually like using some kind of double-sided adhesive along with some liquid glue. So I like the scrapbook.com double-sided adhesive. I find that they have a good number of sizes available. It's also very affordable in comparison to, say, score tape, and I find that it works just as well, if not better, than score tape, which was my go-to for many years. So I highly recommend that. I'm going to go ahead and apply my double-sided adhesive along the long edge of three pieces of my 65-pound cardstock. And then I will adhere those to the others. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fast forward through this. So I'm going to go ahead and use a Teflon bone folder that I have to just burnish the adhesive down on all of them. I just like to make sure that for my cover that they're really stuck, especially since you have to fold it over each other and it can get a little thick. So I want to make sure that it is very well stuck. That's also why I use both double-sided adhesive and liquid glue. So let's go ahead and get these stuck together. So for my liquid glue, I am using the Barely Art glue. I find that it works really well, and it works very similarly to the glitter glue. I also find it a little bit more affordable. It is not acid free, but I am not going to be using this on any areas that will actually show, so that should be fine. The glue does have a much lower acidity rating than regular like glue that you would use, but it does have acid. It isn't acid free, so just bear that in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on fast forward while I finish adhering all of these together. Alright, now that we have all of the pieces adhered together along the long edge, now we are going to take those three sets and do the same thing. So I'm going to apply double-sided adhesive to the long edge on 2 of the 3 pages, and then use liquid adhesive and adhere them all together. So I'm just going to double check and make sure that I am still good on spacing to get all of my chipboard pieces on for my cover. I'm not the greatest at always measuring, so I want to be sure and not have to do this over again, because I have been there before. Alright, so now that we have our very large piece of cardstock ready to go for our cover, we are going to take our cut chipboard pieces and lay them out and glue them down. So I'm going to start with my first piece of 8.5 by 11 chipboard. I'm laying it all out just to make sure that I'm doing okay. And I'm going to apply my liquid adhesive over the chipboard, and then I'm going to lay it down. Now you can't see this in the video, but I have a ruler laid out along the bottom edge of my cardstock so that I can make sure that I get these laid down in a flat line along the bottom edge so that they're all aligned properly. So I'm just going to apply glue to my first spine piece, and I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch or so, maybe slightly larger. I eyeball it, but I make sure that you leave a big enough space that there's some give on your spine. If you put it too close when you go to close your book, it's going to all crack and break, which you do not want, because then you have to do it all over again. So I'm going to, again, put it on fast forward, and we'll see you soon. Okay, now that we have all of our chipboard pieces adhered down, I am going to go ahead and trim the excess cardstock away from the cover. Now, you could have done this prior to gluing all of the pieces of cardstock together, but I, quite frankly, don't have the patience to sit and measure that all out and figure it out, so I just find it easiest to cut the excess away once I have everything glued down. Nobody will see any rough edges because they will be covered by cardstock and pattern paper at the end of the day, so I just find it easier to do it this way, but to each their own. Alright, so now that we have the chipboard pieces adhered to our cardstock for our cover, it is time to start wrapping the cover. So I have this little tool that I purchased off of Amazon. There are some different various sellers on Etsy that have them, along with other sellers on Amazon. I don't have a recommendation. This is the only one I've used. I think they're all pretty similar. And really, it just gives the ability to cut your corners so that you can easily fold them up and over without having excess or not enough coverage. So I'm just going to go ahead and in all four corners, I'm going to use the tool to cut off the excess along the edges. So I'm just using a We Are Memory Keeper's craft knife, but any kind of utility or X-Acto or anything really would work. You could even mark it with a pencil and cut it off with scissors, which I have done in the past. So now we have that done. We are going to go ahead and get started on folding or wrapping our cover. So I like to go along the edges of the chipboard with my bone folder and just get a nice crease going right off the bat. And then I'm going to put a piece of double-sided adhesive along the bottom edge of the chipboard and then the edge of my cardstock. And then I'm going to double it up with some liquid adhesive along the very edge of the cardstock right up against the chipboard so that I can make sure that it adheres really, really well along the edges. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put this on fast forward again, and we'll see you in a little bit. All right, so now that we have the base album covered, I'm going to use my bone folder to just get a nice crisp fold in all of the spine areas so that when I fold the book closed that it doesn't pull apart the paper or rip or crack in any way. So if you do this gently and slowly, you should be able to get a nice fold in your album without any cracking. The thicker your cardstock, the harder it will be to do this. This is why I use 65-pound cardstock for my bases. Sometimes I use it for my pages as well, but for the most part I use the 65-pound cardstock for extra elements and for my base cover. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started on making the binding for the pages. So I'm going to have 6 pages in my album, and for the binding I always like to make my tabs a 1/2 inch. Some people use a 1/4 inch, some people use a full inch. I personally like a 1/2 inch, but do whatever works best for you. So I am going to start at the 3-inch mark on the long side, and I'm just going to mark or score every 1/2 inch until I reach the end of my paper, and then I'm going to start at the 1/2 inch mark on my next sheet, and at the end, when I have enough scores, I will glue the 2 pieces together to create one singular binding section. And so in my case, because I'm doing 6 pages, I need to score at 1/2 inch intervals 18 times. So I'm going to go ahead and just speed this up, and we'll see you soon. Okay, so now that we have all of the scoring, I am going to cut off the excess paper that's left over. And then I'm going to trim the pieces of paper down to size. I'm going to do them to get stacked together so that they're completely even. And I'm going to go ahead and trim off 3/4 of an inch from the 11-inch edge. So they should now be 10 1/4 inches long. All right, so now it's time to put the two pieces together so that we have one cohesive sheet to make our binding. So I'm laying them on top of each other just to make sure that the scoring lines up properly. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a piece of 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive down. And again, I'm using the scrapbook.com adhesive. And then I am going to burnish it down and then use some of my liquid adhesive, because again, I'd like to really make sure that all of my elements are adhered very, very well. And binding and covers, they get quite a bit more wear and tear than a simple page, so I like to make sure and double up. So I'm just going to lay my second sheet with the 1/2 inch score over top of the first sheet's end 1/2 inch score and line them up so that I'm right on the edge of the score line, so that when I fold them, you'll barely be able to tell that they're doubled up. And this is how I make my extra long bindings. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my double-sided adhesive down to create the actual binding tabs, if you will. And to do this, I put it along the first score, and then I skip one, and then put it on the next one, and then every two, skip to skip. I do this because the first one is going to attach to the second one when you fold it over to make the flap. And then the third section, the second piece of double-sided adhesive, is going to actually attach to your cover. And then the fourth section, with the third piece of adhesive on it, is going to attach to the fifth section that doesn't have adhesive to make your second tab, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through this, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so now that we have all of the double-sided adhesive down, I've gone ahead and folded it so that I have all my tabs. I'm going to go ahead and create my tabs now. So I'm pulling off the backing for my double-sided adhesive, and then, as per usual, I'm applying a small amount of liquid adhesive as well. And then I'm just going to fold those together and then use my bone folder so that I can make sure that it gets a very, very clean line, I guess, to it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of them. And as you can see, there is a piece of double-sided adhesive that's left between each of them, because those are the spaces between the tabs. And this is what will get adhered to the base cover. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward again and get through the creation of these tabs. All right, so now that we have all of these glued together, we now have the 6 tabs that we will attach our 6 pages to at the end. So as you can see, there's just these little tabs or folds, if you will, that will allow us to attach the pages. So I'm just making sure that they can be folded both ways and that they, are symmetrical and work well. So I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to add double-sided adhesive to the areas on the left and right of the tabs now, and then we'll go ahead and get this adhered to the base cover. So let's go ahead and fast forward again. All right, so now that we have the double-sided adhesive covering the entirety of our binding piece, I'm going to go ahead and grab my cover and we are going to attach it. So I'm just going to make sure that everything lines up and my spacing is good and kind of eyeball where it's going to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and take off all of the adhesive strip backs, and then I'm going to again apply a bunch of liquid glue over top of the double-sided adhesive, and I'm going to place it down. All right, so now I'm placing it down and I'm going to just press a little bit, and then I'm going to use my large bone folder to make sure that every bit of my binding is stuck in place. So in between every tab and on both sides, I'm going to use the bone folder to press it down right into each corner of the binding. This way I can be sure that it's going to stay adhered, because I have had it in the past when I first started making albums where my binding wouldn't always stay in place over time because I hadn't taken the appropriate steps to make sure that I had very much adhered it to my cover. So now I take the time and I make sure that I get a very, very good binding in place for my pages, because sometimes they can get heavy and you want them to stay in place. You don't want it to fall out over time, especially if this is a gift for somebody. So I'm just going to use my bone folder again where the pages will bend to very gently work the cardstock so that it will bend with the book and not break or crack. So I'm going to do that for both. Alright, so now that we have our base cover made, we're going to go ahead and cover the exposed areas on the inside covers. So the front and back, and then the spine areas as well. So to do that, I'm going to take some more 65-pound cardstock and I'm going to trim it down a 1/4 inch on either side, so that it will cover the area on my inside front cover, and I'll do this again for the back with a little bit of room on all 4 sides. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure the area for the right spine and the piece that will that folds over the cover. And I'm going to give it a little extra space so that I can double it up on the back cover area. And this way I can cover all of the exposed area without having any seams essentially showing. So I'm going to cut this down to the same size. And then I'm just going to glue everything down and again use my bone folder to gently work the cardstock in all the fold areas of the cover. Alright, so now that I have a nice fold in my cover and it's starting to shape up pretty well, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the base pages. So I like to use heavier cardstock, so here I'm going to use 100-pound cardstock for my base pages. I like to use it for at least the base because it's sturdier and it holds up a little bit better. So I don't necessarily use it for all of the components in my albums, and I certainly don't use it for really, really thick layouts that I do, but for my base pages, I find that it stands up to the test of time a lot better than a lighter weight cardstock does, just because pages are opened and turned quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the pages that I need. Because I want all of these to be pocket pages, I'm going to need 12 sheets. And to make them fit the book, because I don't have 12 by 12, for example, I'm going to adhere these together using separate strips. This was something that I saw Scrap Queen do quite a while ago in one of her videos, and I thought it was a brilliant way to be able to make larger pages without having to have, much larger paper in order to be able to score and get the folds. So I am going to trim the pages down to 8 inches by 10 3/4 inches. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut all of my pages to that size, and we'll be back. Alright, so now we have all of our pages cut down to size. I am going to trim a couple of pages to 8 1/4, and then I'm going to start cutting 1-inch strips from that, and I'm going to need 12 because you're going to need 2 for each set of 2 pages to make your 6 pocket pages. Alright, now that we have all 12 of our 1-inch by 8 1/4 inch pieces, we're going to go ahead and score them down the center at a 1/2 inch for each one. Alright, so now that we have all of our strips cut and scored and folded, we are going to attach them to our pages to create our pockets. So I'm just going to take 2 pieces of my pre-cut cardstock and I'm going to line them up together, and then I am going to go ahead and put this on. And as you can see, I did not measure properly. Like I said earlier, I have an issue with it. So I'm going to have to trim all of my pieces down by a little better than 1/4 inch or so. So let's go ahead and attach all of these on, and we're almost done the cover and base pages. Alright, so now we have our cover. We've covered it, we've covered the inside of it, we've created our binding system, and now we have all 6 of our pocket pages that we will attach once they have been decorated. So stay tuned for my next video, which will cover the creation of our first pocket page. Stay tuned.